Hi, welcome to Author Straight Talk with Sarah Gertis. My name is Chuck. That is Sarah, and her new book is coming out soon called, guess what? Author Straight Talk. And this particular series of videos is to give you an idea on some of the things that she's learned as an expert and really an author of over 20 years. And the book is really meant and designed to help you avoid some of the pitfalls. So today, Sarah, we're going to talk about copyrights, ownerships, and avoiding lawsuits. Three very important things, but let's start with copyrights.
So on the surface, copyright is a very straightforward process. When you create something, you're going to register that with the appropriate entities on the government side. But there are some particulars that a lot of people don't know about. I'll give you an example. If you are published with a mainstream publisher, there are going to be restrictions on what you or other people can use from that book. With one of my books with McGraw-Hill, I was restricted from using anything over 20% of that book in any marketing materials and any promotional campaigns, even what I put on my website. So one of the first things you need to think about with copyright is your use of that book, and then also other entities' use of that book as well. You might want to give it to Goodreads. You might want to give excerpts to other blogs or other reviewers. They are going to be restricted based on copyright requirements from that publisher. Now, if you're self-publishing or you've gone through an independent, you have jurisdiction over that. So that's not an issue. But beware that there's a lot of details in copyright that many people just simply don't know about.
Are stories actually copywritten? This is something that I don't know. Like for example, if I'm a songwriter and I write a song and it has a certain chord progression and it goes a certain
Hmm.
way and it's like, oh,
Hmm.
that sounds like an old Led Zeppelin song. I mean,
Right.
is that same thing happen in publishing? Is that in book
Well, actually,
publishing?
if you're using some Led Zeppelin riff, you're going to get sued. So music publishing is no different than authoring in the traditional print book world, because there are limits as to the percentage of a song. I know a lot of viewers may not know this as well, but some of those limits might be 2 seconds, 7 seconds, 12 seconds. And not only do you have to get permission from that copyright holder, but you need to probably give some compensation. Now, in the publishing world and also in the music world, it becomes public domain after a number of years. And so that depends on your industry. So you need to check on it. However, there's a general rule that it's like 40 or 50 years for certain nonfiction works or fiction works. That's why you can go and get free books, because after a period of time, they've entered the public domain. It's not going to happen while I'm alive, thank heavens.
Yeah.
So my stuff will still be protected. If you want to use my stuff as an excerpt, then you need to get permission. But Chuck, I think your second question was on ideas. Nobody can copyright an idea. People like J.K. Rowling and others, they'll say, well, she stole an idea. Yeah, well, guess what? There have been goblins around for hundreds of years. There's vampires and trolls. What gets copyrighted is the way that idea, which has been the same for a millennia, gets translated to a book. And that's why most of the copyright lawsuits that come about in the fiction world, they're never successful. Most of the time, they're not successful.
Yeah, so if I'm with a large publisher, they're going to kind of do a lot of that work for me. But if I'm self-published, I have to take the onus on myself to make sure I'm
Mhm.
not, involved in any copyright issues, correct?
Oh, well, that's right. And actually, most copyright issues come into play in nonfiction.
Uh,
And that kind of goes into ownership of the content. So let me go into that if I may. If you're writing a nonfiction book on a particular subject, it's probably coming from your head, so you're in the clear. That's not an issue. If you are going to be hired as a ghostwriter or a contract author, let's say for somebody's biography, as I was with the Sue Kim, that copyright is up to negotiation. In some cases, the subject of the book will own copyright of the book. It's pretty rare. Most of the time, the copyright holder will be the author. However, I know of many cases where an author's been hired as a ghostwriter or a contractor. They get a set fee, they don't get any royalties of the book, and they do not hold the copyright. So there's a lot of minutia that I go into in Author Straight Talk about the situation and what you need to look out for as an author.
are you at liberty to talk a little bit about your own personal experience with that, with the Sue Kim story?
Sure, sure. I own copyright to that story. In that case, it was kind of interesting because I was paid $20,000 to write this book. And I thought it was going to take me 6 months, and it took me about 3 years because just the researching alone and the interviews of almost 100 people took about 2 years. So at the end of that, even though I was a contractor, I hold copyright because it was such a big project and I really created it from scratch. So most individuals who are writing a biography or an authorized biography or something like that will hold the copyright.
All right, let's talk about ownership now. We've kind of touched on that just a little bit. Can you explain?
Sure. So ownership, it really is dovetails into the copyright. Who owns that material? There are cases where the publisher is going to own the material and not the author. And let me give you one. Um, if you are a author for hire, let's say you're not making a living writing your own fiction. You know, you love it, it's wonderful, but nobody's buying it. And so you say, but you are a good author. I was approached by a publisher through my agent who said, look, we have a series of books and they're in the fantasy world, and we hire authors, and the author's name is on the book jacket. Okay. What they did was they paid $7,500 per book, so per manuscript, and they were shorter books. They're about 250 pages long, and they would sign the author up for a series of books, let's say 6 or 7 or 8. Well, at $7,500 per book, you could almost make a living. You could almost be above the poverty line if you could write 2 or 3 books. However, that is a contractor for hire. So I would get no royalties of the book. They were offering to give a small advance, like about $5,000. But that was at one time. So no matter if I wrote 10 or 15, I was getting no more advance than that one $5,000. But the most important thing is I would not hold copyright. So a lot of times the copyright holder is going to be the same as the individual who gets, or the entity who gets, the long-term royalties. So they came up with the idea. I would write the book to their idea, and they would get all the royalties. So at the end of the day, on that first book, I would have gotten about $12,500, and then nothing ever more. And each subsequent book would have been about $7,500. So I chose not to do that, even though I provided them a writing sample and they loved it. And they said, oh, you would be great for this genre. But I wanted to be a novelist. And so I chose not to go down that path. And I'm actually glad that I did. However, you can make a fair amount of money if you want that course.
Yeah, and at that point, you're just like a machine, though, right? You're just kind of like
That's right.
knocking them out,
Yeah, yeah,
and maybe that's okay for
that's a
some people.
grind. Well, think about it. A lot of authors are the same as actors who do commercials.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of notoriety and a lot of fame doing commercials, and then people will pay you to come to an event and do an opening. Okay, so that's where they will make their money, and I talk about that in a previous video on ancillary forms of author revenue. However, if you love to write and it's your passion and you want to see your name on a bookshelf, on a cool looking book, keep your day job and then write on the side. And then you kind of have the best of both worlds. You are making extra money to maybe save up for that trip to Europe. You've got a legitimate publisher behind you. You're just not making $100,000 a year.
Okay, so I have my story, I have my
Mhm,
book, I'm going to self-publish. I
mhm.
think I have my copyright. How do I make sure all of my ducks are in a row and I avoid any kind of legal issues down the road?
Okay, well, the first thing is you don't steal from anybody. That's always a bad policy. That's never going to lead you down the right road. In fiction, it's a lot easier. There's very few concerns in fiction. If you're coming up with a new idea, you're not plagiarizing anybody else. And lawsuits come down to really two things: stealing first and foremost. If you are plagiarizing somebody else's work, and a very simplistic definition of plagiarism is you have a percentage. If you're using the exact same line, that's a full-on theft. But if you're using a percentage of that, and it reoccurs enough in your book that readers or publishers can identify a trend, okay, that's plagiarism. That's for fiction. Now, if you're in the nonfiction world and you fail to give credit, so if I'm writing a nonfiction book and I source other things online or in other books, I have to do my job, and I have to source where I've gotten that anecdote or that data point or that statistic. Okay, so you can never run into problems if you're honest and you source. For nonfiction writers, when it comes to public entities, persons, celebrities, the US law is very generous and very gracious towards authors. If you are going to cite, let's say someone's an alcoholic or they abuse their kid, if you have it that reference from one individual, it has to be sourced by name. However, if you look at the U.S. Journalistic ethics, there's a document, and you can actually just Google it. It says that if you have two or more people giving you the same quote or the same reference, then you don't need to identify them. So that's the third way that you stay out of trouble with the law.
That is a lot of information and things that I had no clue on, but that's the whole point of this book, Author Straight Talk, that Sarah has written. It's coming out very, very soon, and it'll break all of these things down in way more detail. Now, on the next video, we're going to talk about something that I'm kind of passionate about, and I like: social media and sales. And the advent of social media has really changed opportunities for aspiring authors, and I know you're not going to want to miss that. Now, speaking of social media, Sarah, if people want to stay connected with you in that way, how do they do that?
So you've got a couple different opportunities. One is my website, sarahgerdes.com. I have a Facebook under the same name, Sarah Gerdes. The YouTube channel is YouTube/Chamber Series, and with enough subscribers, it may one day change to Sarah Gerdes. We also have Goodreads, which is a great forum for both readers and authors. And last but not least, we have Instagram, which I live on. I'm a very visual person, and that is Sarah_J_Gerdes.
Well, and I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about the whole social media aspect and how we can leverage that as aspiring authors. That is next time right here on Author Straight Talk with Sarah Gerdes.